Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here with you today, everyone in person and everyone who's joining on Zoom. Good afternoon. I am Stephanie Jones, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to this very special lecture series featuring Professor Betty St.Pierre and many renowned scholars who have joined us since September. Today is the fifth of what will be 6 lectures, and it is difficult to comprehend how the material discursive forces of this country have tilted since that first lecture only 5 months ago. The steady, consistent presence of so many people gathering each month on Zoom and in person has provided, at least for many of us, something very dear to depend on and look forward to. So thank you all for that. We could not have known how precious these gatherings would feel and how much we would desperately need a space-time to be in community with one another. Many of you on Zoom have joined us at all times of the day and night, some of you joking that you would be joining in your pajamas. So thank you to each of you across this country and across our shared planet. We are filled with gratitude for your enthusiasm and for the opportunity to connect around Dr. St.Pierre's work and invite all of you into the long legacy of qualitative research here at the University of Georgia. Welcome to the fold. We couldn't make these lectures available to you via Zoom if it wasn't for Jeff Reeder, our audiovisual and technology expert, and the person who knows how to solve every problem, including fuzzy recordings. Jeff, it really, really, really is a privilege to work with you. Thank you.
Pleasure for me as well.
Our organizing committee includes graduate students and faculty from the University of Georgia and beyond. As a team, we are cis and trans women, men, gay, straight, immigrants, American-born citizens, international students, indigenous, partnered, single, young, middle-aged, older than middle-aged. We are people with disabilities, with children and without children, and we are from the working classes, the poor, and the upper middle classes. Our diversity makes us strong, powerful, and smart. Those who want to divide, conquer, control, and destroy us are weak, although intimidating. The terrorizing tactics already being used by this new administration on immigrants and federal government workers are akin to what some would call psychological warfare, and a glimpse into how they are plugging in to an already existing and also becoming material discursive assemblage on fascist authoritarian strategy. Every existing and up until now stabilizing structure of government in the United States is under attack and being tested like never before. As the prolific American historian Heather Cox Richardson said just a couple days ago, this country has never faced a threat like it is facing today. Noam Chomsky would call this neo-fascism. And in an interview from 2022, he said, quote, "One consequence of the neoliberal social economic policies is collapse of the social order, yielding a breeding ground for extremism, violence, hatred, search for scapegoats, and fertile terrain for authoritarian figures who can posture as the savior." And we're on the road to a form of neo-fascism. He continued, quote, "The Britannica defines neoliberalism as a, quote, ideology and policy model that emphasizes the value of free market competition, end quote, with, quote, minimal state intervention. That is the conventional picture, Noam Chomsky says. Reality is different." Quote from Noam Chomsky, The actual policy model threw open the doors for the masters of the economy, who also dominate the state to seek profit and power with few constraints. In brief, unconstrained class war. End quote. We now have a vice president of the United States of America who calls professors the enemy and says that universities should be targeted and attacked, and a big portion of the general public who is repeating these sentiments. If being the enemy means giving people access to language theory philosophy that helps them make sense of the systems of power that attempt to govern our lives and shape the very flesh humanity, then I am proud to be so. And if you look around the room, I am in good company. Systems of power continue to emerge and reconfigure themselves. They are not static and never fully available to capture. And this is something that we should already know. Even if their emergence continues to surprise us and shock us. But I do wonder why so few students have access to language and thought to make sense of neoliberalism, as simple as that is, and to white Christian nationalism. Now we add another to our list to inquire to, recognize in our own entanglements and give language to as we witness it, neo-fascism. But you cannot understand neo-fascism without understanding neoliberalism. So it's time, as Betty would tell us, to start reading and read some more and then get to work. Professor Jonathan Eckel from George Washington University started off our day together this morning with a fabulous workshop doing just that, inviting us to read, think, be creative, and to look. A reminder to pay attention to the visual forces operating. And we have with us Professor Hillevi Lins Taguchi from the University of Stockholm, who will be with us tomorrow as well. Both of them will join Betty on stage after the lecture for some casual back porch conversations. This series is supported by the University of Georgia Institute for Women's and Gender Studies, the Graduate School, the Mary Frances Early College of Education, which is named after the first African-American graduate of this institution. We are also supported by the Interdisciplinary Qualitative Studies Program, the Red Clay Writing Project, the University of Alabama, North Carolina State University, the Ohio State University, and the lecture events this month are also supported by the Department of Educational Theory and Practice here at UGA. As we gather here in Athens, in the United States of America, it is so important to acknowledge the power of place, land, and labor. This university is located on the traditional ancestral territory of Muscogee-speaking and Cherokee peoples, as well as other Native communities who were forcibly removed from their homelands. The lands occupied by the university throughout the state were the places of lived relationships, learning, ceremony, and resistance. We recognize these Native peoples as the original caretakers who continue to pass on their histories and traditions, sustaining connections to their ancestral lands and waters. And we are able to be here today together, due in part, that's okay, to the labor of enslaved people of African descent who helped to build the university and the ongoing daily labor of many people whom students and faculty very, very rarely see or know. Our community of Athens in the state of Georgia has benefited from the labor of many immigrants and migrant workers, including some of you sitting in this room and watching from afar on Zoom. We are an interdependent national and global society, and I personally am grateful for the international community that has spoken out about the leader of the United States and the dangerous situation we are in within the borders of this country and as a global society. the explicit attack on the US Constitution and all immigrants and migrants, the rolling back of federal protections for women, trans people, gay people, people of color, people with disabilities, elderly people, and poor people. The criminalizing of doctors who provide pregnant women with the care that they choose and need. The explicit attack on women's bodies for control and punishment. The attack on a bishop asking the president to show mercy. The destruction of cooperative international relationships, the aggression toward our allies, and the explicit approval and encouraging of Nazi, neo-Nazi, fascist, and neo-fascist groups, beliefs, ideas, and actions are terrifying. It is difficult to know what to do. So we come together in creative, critical, and joyful community. The proliferation of the arts, new language, new worlds, and new and different ways of being, doing, thinking, seeing, perceiving, and imagining have always been imperative in the fight against fascism, authoritarianism, dictators, Nazism, neoliberalism, colonialism, white supremacy, human supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. So these are some things that we can do. And many people will dig deep and try to hold people accountable to the rules and the structures of this democracy. Some of you might be surprised to hear that Betty St.Pierre can be one of the biggest rule followers I've ever known. While her scholarship and teaching encourages resistance and freedom through newness and practices outside the rules of conventional social science, she has taught many of us that there is more than one way to be an activist, an advocate, and to plug into assemblages with an intention to bring about change. She has shown us for 30 years. Sorry, let me back up. She often called herself Betty the librarian. And there are few people on this campus who know the rules codified through bylaws more and better than Betty St.Pierre. She has shown us across 30 years that we can work outside the confines of rules, and we can also work for good inside the confine of rules, structures, and regulations. Wherever, whenever, and however we do our work, I suspect she would tell us to pay attention to how power is operating here, what kind of human subject is being conceived, and where is agency located, and then plug in and get to work.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the University of Georgia and to the continuation of this series of 6 lectures on Post Qualitative Inquiry, which began last September. Together, these lectures can be considered a short course in Post Qualitative Inquiry because they cover quite a bit of the same material I teach in semester-long courses here at UGA. I want to thank all of you who have registered for the PQI certificate, as well as those who send me questions, which I try to incorporate in my lectures at some point. I also want to welcome my family today, my 2 wonderful cousins, Sue and Mike Scott, right here on the front. I just to Athens from Florida. Our family is strong with teachers, and the 3 of us chose to be English teachers. I keep asking them to help me read and edit dissertations, and they keep refusing. Thanks for being here today. Once again, I want to express my deep gratitude to my accomplished and generous colleague, Stephanie Jones, who is the chief organizer of this series, and to Melissa Freeman and Hillary Hughes, all faculty at the University of Georgia, and also to Karen Spector from the University of Alabama. They comprise the main faculty committee responsible for the series. I'm also very grateful to other faculty at UGA and other institutions who are supporting the lecture series, to the committee of UGA students, and to our technology experts, especially Jeff, who are contributing their time to make each lecture possible. And I'm so very happy today to welcome my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jonathan Eckel, a graduate of our College of Education, who began his academic career at Johns Hopkins University and is now at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., which is just a 10-minute walk from the White House and also close to the remarkable array of museums in our nation's capital. Dr. Eckel and his students have worked on projects with both the National Gallery of Art and the National Museum of Women and the Arts. Jonathan graduated in 2005 from our Language and Literacy Education Department, and his advisee was Dr. Donna Alverman, a national and international leader in the field of literacy, who for many years brought excellent doctoral students to UGA to study. I was lucky to work with quite a few of them and very fortunate to serve on Jonathan's dissertation committee and to think with him in several doctoral seminars. Jonathan is also an artist, a painter, and he included a simply stunning painting in a very smart paper he wrote for a 2017 special issue of Qualitative Inquiry, which Dr. Hilaby Lenz-Taguchi, who is also here with us today as well, and I edited on using philosophical concepts to inquire. When I first read the paper Jonathan submitted for that special issue, I noticed that he hadn't included the name of the artist in the caption for the painting. It occurred to me that he might have painted it, and I instructed him, as if I were still his professor, to claim it, to include his name. He refused, saying in true Deleuzian fashion that he preferred to remain imperceptible. But after some arm twisting, I won. When he was at UGA, Jonathan also worked with Dr. Ron Bogue in our comparative literature department, who's an internationally renowned Deleuzian scholar. I have no doubt but that Jonathan is one of the finest Deleuzian scholars in education at this time. I think those of you who have read his work and who attended his workshop this morning have a sense of his expertise and creativity. It's always such a pleasure when our students' work exceeds the reach of our own, when they become our teachers and colleagues, marching ahead to clear space for their own students, the next generation. I'm very lucky that Jonathan has not only become my teacher, but also my great friend. We are blessed with riches in this new year because Professor Hilaby Lenz-Taguchi from Stockholm University in Sweden is also with us and will be meeting with students and faculty in our college tomorrow. Patty Lather introduced me to Hilaby many years ago at, I believe, an AERA conference. Patty told me that Hilaby was one of the finest European feminist scholars and that I needed to keep up with her work because she was always in the vanguard. I did as Patty instructed, as most of us did, read Hilaby's papers and attended her conference presentations. Hilaby has been at the center of intellectual energy, not just in her area of expertise, which is early childhood education, but also in the new work, for example, feminist new materialism and science studies, and more generally in post-structural theories and concepts. I explained in my January lecture that Lisa Matzey and Alicia Jackson were with us, that Hilaby and Lisa organized a conference that Hilaby just referred to at Stockholm University in 2013 and hosted a group of international feminists. That conference continues to be generative for all of us. Hilaby and I later edited a special issue of Qualitative Inquiry about using philosophical concepts in our work. We're so isolated here in the US, and events like the one Hilaby and Lisa organized are rare and very special. We really need other people to help us think, especially scholars from other countries with different intellectual and political histories, to challenge and inspire us, to set the pace for work we haven't yet been able to think. Hillary does that not only for the students and colleagues she works with at her own university, but for all of us who benefit from her outstanding scholarship. To have both Hillary and Jonathan here with us is truly a gift. In their different projects, they challenge us to address problems the world urgently poses for us, to seek out difference, to experiment, and invent the future. And what might that difference look like? What might it do? To begin that work, John Rockman wrote that we need to attend not to what already exists, but to new forces not already contained in our projects and programs and ways of thinking that accompany them. In other words, he wrote, to make connections, one needs not knowledge, certainty, or even ontology, but rather a trust that something may come out, though one is not completely sure yet what. Rockman contrasts Descartes' trust in certainty and truth guaranteed by systematic rational method with Nietzsche's trust in the throw of the dice, when unpredictable forces are thrust together by chance in contingent relations. Descartes' desire is to close off, secure, and shut down, while Nietzsche's is to take a chance, to risk, to open up to the too big and the too much, and the not yet that might shatter thought already thought, thought secure in its certainty about what is and what to do. In an earlier lecture, I argued that our pre-existing social science research methodologies are neither philosophical enough or empirical enough for the work we need to do in this increasingly rude and treacherous world, a world no longer amenable to our sciences, whether natural or social. The world is indeed screaming at us. Too many fires and snowstorms and droughts and hurricanes and floods, too many disasters raging for too long in unexpected places exceed science's causal and predictive capacities. We do not know this savage world. Norms have been broken, the limits of knowledge have been breached, and things are out of control. Of course, everything has always been out of human control. Nonetheless, humanism's human, that master of the universe, believed he had tamed existence, not only in language, in words, in concepts, but also in conceptual practices that are now inadequate. I think we desperately need new concepts, new thought, and a different understanding of practices for the very real, empirical, philosophical problems the world poses in this 21st century state of emergency. As Deleuze wrote, we need to strip thought of its innateness and force it to think otherwise. As Derrida wrote, we must interrupt the ordinary course of things with the most concrete urgency and take responsibility for the future to come. But I'm not sure any kind of inquiry which exists now is adequate to the tasks facing us, which, as we know, are as much about power and politics as science. I understand better than ever Foucault's description of his work as pessimistic activism. He wrote about pessimistic activism in 1983, and if we add 40 years of planetary destruction to that, pessimism can easily overcome activism so that it's hard to keep going. Even here in beautiful, temperate Athens, Georgia, which recently witnessed 2 snowstorms in 2 weeks. It's increasingly difficult for me to switch off this end of world disaster movie we're living and pretend everything is okay. Pretend we can just do social science as usual, just drop down into the simple structures of our 20th century research methodologies and produce some findings to fill rather insignificant gaps in knowledge that no longer counts for much. In the 40 years since Foucault, who studied the human sciences very seriously, wrote those words, pessimistic activism, the desire of the social human sciences to be scientific and powerful like the natural sciences has exploded. And we scientized and methodologized all sorts of trivial matters and ordinary practices. In my January lecture, I described a study in the science of success in the business world that tested the idea that simply following a routine, even one as arbitrary as drawing something on a piece of paper, sprinkling salt over it, and crumbling it up could help calm a person's nerves before a presentation, thus contributing to that person's success in the world of business. In the current February issue of The Atlantic, I read an article about the science of seasonal color analysis. You know, whether you're a winter and so should wear cool colors like ruby red and emerald green, or a summer and should wear soft colors like gray, navy, and taupe. The big questions in the science of seasonal color analysis are something like, can true summers wear gold? Can winters be blonde? Women have paid thousands of dollars to color analysts who wear white lab coats in their online videos and claim that color analysis is, and I quote, logical, it's systematic, and it's based on science. If one believes that the science of success and the science of seasonal color analysis address important topics and are in truth scientific, I guess it's not surprising that at an affect theory conference 10 years ago, the anthropologist Kathleen Stewart referred to the social sciences as the horrible social sciences. I think the social sciences too often trivialize the spectacular wonder of science. In their zeal to be scientific, they not only scientize mundane topics, they also methodologize and systematize all sorts of everyday practices to make them scientific. Practices like talking with people, watching them, writing, walking. Just search Google Scholar for the phrase as a method, and see what pops up. Friendship as a method, introspection as a method, collage as a method, and so on. As a social science colleague told me in a dissertation committee meeting some years ago, I can methodologize anything. We've known for decades that our Enlightenment birthright, scientific knowledge grounded in the scientific method and in evidence that's observable in the empirical world, counts more in the social sciences than speculative philosophical knowledge. But we also know that science and philosophy have not always been divided. And of course, they still aren't. A colleague in my college who did well-funded, outstanding quantitative studies in education said to me some years ago, Betty, every scientific study is philosophical. I wish he had not retired. As I wrote everything I just said, which tends toward the gloomy and dispiriting, some words from the prize-winning fiction writer Michael Ondaatje broke through my pessimism. He announced rather grandly, let me now re-emphasize the extreme looseness in the structure of things. It's that looseness which gives me hope and fuels activism, the play in the structure, the understanding that things are not settled, that we can always change things, that reality is only a word, that what we think is true and real is only fiction, a description that can be rewritten. But how do we do that? How do we take advantage of the forces of the world that are not yet contained in our thoughts and our projects? Where do we begin? Those are certainly reasonable questions to ask. And they're the most common questions social science researchers who've been trained as methodologists ask me about post-qualitative inquiry. Where do I begin? What do I do? Then what do I do? Dr. St.Pierre, don't tell me to read a lot, just tell me what to do. I need to graduate. I believe people ask those questions because our pre-existing humanist social science research methodologies that dominate our work do tell researchers what to do and what to do next and then next. Those methodologies are organized by the practice theory binary, and they privilege practice, as if practice, doing, can somehow exist outside thought, thinking. But Gayatri Spivak explained that no practice takes place without presupposing itself as an example of some more or less powerful theory. In other words, what we think enables what we do. I think feminism is a great example of a powerful theory that can change what we do and how we live. I know there are things I thought and said and did before I studied feminism that I can no longer think or say or do. The same holds true for things I can no longer think, say, or do after studying Derrida, Foucault, Deleuze, and Guattari, and other philosophers we now call post-structural. Powerful theories can take us up and transform us so that we turn away from disciplinary dogma that's grown stale, exhausted, and even dangerous. The turn promises new and different approaches to problems the world poses. Thomas Kuhn, the historian and philosopher of the natural sciences, called those terms paradigm shifts. In earlier lectures, I've explained that post-structural scholars were very clear they would not tell people what to do. Foucault, for example, wrote that my project is precisely to bring it about that people no longer know what to do, so that acts, gestures, discourses that up until then had seemed to go without saying become problematic, difficult, dangerous. Derrida said in an interview, I was wondering myself if I know where I'm going. So I would answer you by saying first that I'm trying precisely to put myself at a point where I no longer know where I'm going. Both Foucault's and Derrida's comments reflect imminence, Nietzsche's dice throw, risk, and experimentation. Hillary said this earlier, but I've always appreciated the advice of Elliot Eisner, a scholar of art and education, who encouraged us to work at the edge of incompetence, and Patty Lather's embrace of rigorous confusion. How in 2025 can we address the terrifying problems the world now poses if we keep thinking and doing the same things that got us here? Of course, not knowing what to do doesn't mean there's nothing to do. Foucault wrote, and if I don't ever say what must be done, it isn't because I believe there's nothing to be done. On the contrary, it's because I think there are 1,000 things to do, to invent, to forge. Who knows what we might think and do if we were unleashed from the stifling constraints of disciplinary limits. That freedom, that dice throw, the not knowing what to do, is liberating for some and frightening for others. It's been liberating for me, and I especially like this comment from Derrida about how this resistance might work. He wrote these lovely words: knowing how not to be there and how to be strong for not being there right away, knowing how not to deliver on command, how to wait and make wait without mastering anything of the final destination. The words of scholars we now call post-structural have always given me courage to refuse dogmatic thought and then think again, to refuse disciplinary practices and do something different. And they have certainly taught me that theory and practice are not in a binary relation, but are always already completely imbricated. So Derrida wrote that the new work involves waiting and not being there right away. Spivak said the work is slow, and Deleuze and Parnay wrote that it requires a very lengthy preparation, yet no method, rules, or recipe. That description of scholarship and inquiry is quite different from typical social science directives, which prefer we move quickly and efficiently from one study to the next and the next, piling up findings, filling gaps, and getting grants for each project. But that description does suit post-qualitative inquiry. For example, my 35 years in academia as both student and professor has not been a series of separate individual projects that began and ended following each other in chronological time. Everything has always happened at once and been more suited to Deleuze and Guattari's description of work that is a groping experimentation, work that is slow, as Spivak said, work that waits and does not deliver on command, as Derrida wrote. The work has including struggling against the dogma of my training, reading and reading and reading, letting philosophical concepts of immanence like fold, axiety, and deconstruction slowly do their work, stopping to write, thinking, whatever that is, developing new doctoral seminars to learn with my exceptional students, talking with colleagues who are certainly smarter than I am, and always reading and reading and reading. During those 35 years, I've returned again and again to two problems the world poses. First, the problem of human being, that I, Descartes' cogito, the person with an identity, the self, the individual, the subject, me. We've used so many words to describe human being, which humanism extracts from the rest of being and sets at its beginning, center, and end. My second problem is language, words, text, which human believes can capture, close off, and represent the world, stand in for the world. Early on, those two ancient, powerful, dominating concepts, human being and language, seemed intractable and impossible to refuse. But as I've said, deconstruction happens, and if you press on human being and language, which seems so certain and secure, they too will stutter and shiver and fly off. They can't withstand a philosophy of immanence in which nothing is fixed and stable, but is always in continuous variation, never the same, not yet. If you notice, I just identified practices for post-qualitative inquiry, which I'm supposed to talk about in this lecture. Reading, writing, thinking, talking with others, teaching, and on and on. But I still get that question. Dr. St.Pierre, just don't tell me to read and write and think, tell me what to do. As if reading, writing, and thinking aren't practices, things to do. So in the 2015 chapter for today's lecture, I tried to provide a list of what to do that I expect isn't as satisfactory as practices and methodologies to-do list, like identify a research question, do a literature review on that topic, choose a research design, write a research proposal, choose methods for data collection, get approval from IRB to do the study, interview humans and observe them, collect artifacts in the field, choose methods for data analysis, write up your findings, and be systematic throughout that process. No messing around, no veering off course, no waiting, just follow the recipe. I'm afraid there's no recipe like that for post-qualitative inquiry. Instead, in that chapter, I offered the following list of 4 practices, which I believe happen all at once, and I'm sure there are more. First, refuse methodology. Second, read. And now look after Jonathan's workshop this morning. Begin with theories and concepts and not methods. Trust yourself and get to work. And because I like to write, I stop every now and then to write, which is part of my work. But your work might include painting or traveling or something else that feeds your soul. So here's what those 4 practices for post-qualitative inquiry might look like. First, refuse methodology. You've heard me say in these lectures that it took me many years to do that because I was overtrained as a qualitative methodologist. I took many qualitative research courses in my doctoral studies. I taught qualitative methodology to thousands of students. I believed in it even after it became positivist in response to scientifically based and evidence-based everything from the mandates from the U.S. Institute of Education Sciences. I clung to it even though it failed over and over again, even though I knew it perpetuated the 2 humanist problems which have obsessed me, human being and language. It was like being lured by the plot and characters of a romance novel, which you know is pure fiction, impossible, but nonetheless so satisfying, so predictable and comfortable. You don't have to think much if what counts as the empirical is what really exists out there, or if a methodology is in control telling me what to do. As Whitehead said, my mind was in a groove. As Deleuze-Guattari said, it was just a habit. Methodology was nothing but a habit. I believe it was my students more than anything else who forced me to think differently. Students who, unlike me, studied post-structuralism and other theories at the beginning of their doctoral studies instead of methodology. They'd come to my office and say, Dr. St.Pierre, I don't think I could do an interview study. And I'd say, why not? And then they talk about something Foucault or Butler or Spivak or Derrida had written. And I'd agree with them and ask, well, then what do you want to do? And they'd tell me, and I'd say, that sounds great, just keep going. Even if students who were reading post-structuralism did an interview study, for example, it often dropped out of their dissertations in the end because they realized at some point that the methodology just didn't fit the onto-epistemological order in which they were thinking and living. One of my colleagues called these dissertations without methodology dissertations of ideas, and I love that description. So the first practices for Post Qualitative Inquiry is to refuse methodology, and my desire is for my students to be able to do that more quickly than I did if they want to. The second practice is to read and read and read. I often say that no one can read for you, and that people who read a lot can always tell when others don't. I'm teaching a doctoral seminar on new materialism right now, and some of the students in that class have taken several theory courses with me and other professors. They're in their second or third years of their doctoral program, and they're really readers. I can hear their reading when they talk. They refer to Althusser and Crenshaw and Marx and Butler and Derrida and so on, and they use their concepts as they think and speak. As Patty Lather might say, they've gotten smart. All that reading has brought them expertise and confidence. I begin almost all my doctoral courses now with Descartes and Thomas Kuhn, and students who take several of my classes learn the value of rereading their text, of finding that the book is not the same book when they read it again. The texts we read in my classes are not meant to be consumed, understood, and then put aside because comprehension and mastery is not the goal of this reading. In fact, my students learn, as I've learned, they might have to read a book before they're ready to read it. When students tell me they can't use certain words anymore, I know they've made a turn and can't go back. The normalized topics and concepts they were interested in at the beginning of their doctoral studies often become strange and stranger as they read and read. My wonderful colleague Stephanie Jones usually interrupts me about here and says, and you have to write too. And I agree. My reading usually takes me to writing because as an academic, I'm expected to write. But I'm a happy writer and I trust writing as I do reading. I've learned that both take me up and take me someplace else. I read and then set myself the task of writing to dig into something I'm confused about. Some of the papers for this lecture series illustrate that rigorous confusion. Papers on empiricism, philosophical concepts, immanence, and so on. I do worry that academia values writing but not reading. For example, I just submitted documentation to my dean for my 2024 faculty annual evaluation, but I wasn't asked to include the number and titles of books and papers I read last year, just what I've written. The positivist structure of accountability that organizes academia values material projects that can be counted and measured, which means, of course, that a 25-page journal article that might not be very good counts more than a 5-page terrific article. There's a material empirical product at the end of writing, not so reading. Reading, like thinking, is immaterial and seems mysterious, therefore is not valuable. And why keep your head in a book anyway when you could be productive writing papers for publication? I believe we ask our students to write too soon, before they've read enough to write, before they have much to think with. This reading and reading and reading I'm talking about is exactly that slow preparation Spivak, Butler, Derrida, Deleuze, and many others have described. In my last lecture, I said that two short sentences on page 263 of Deleuze and Guattari's book, A Thousand Plateaus, changed my life forever. And there are so many sentences in so many other books that have produced similar shocks to thought. I look at the unread books on my shelves and know that a sentence on any page could force another turn, a shift, a different life. This is the daunting and joyous pleasure of a scholar's life. In my teaching, I recommend, of course, that students interested in post-qualitative inquiry study scholars we now call post-structural. And over the years, I've developed doctoral seminars in which we do that together. Students also take courses in our philosophy department, in geography, in linguistics, in art, and they organize reading groups to read together. In that reading, they find post-structural theories and other theories and concepts that help reorient their thinking about ordinary humanist concepts, which are about like human being and language, which have kept me busy for years. So far, I've suggested that those interested in post-qualitative inquiry refuse methodology and read. But those two practices are not sequential. It may be that, like me, you need to read and study post-structural theory and its ontology of immanence for years before methodology becomes unthinkable. Indeed, that may be why methodology textbooks mostly avoid ontology. But it's in the reading that we find philosophical concepts like fold and hexiety that can reorient thought and open up space for difference, for the new. And that leads me to my third practice for post-qualitative inquiry, which is to begin not with methodology, but with post-structural concepts of immanence that can help reorient thought, work on thought, open thought to the unthought. As I said in my last lecture on hexiety, social science research methodologies typically require research proposals and even IRB applications that announce the beginning of research. But the immanent ontology of post-qualitative inquiry cannot and does not locate the beginning or ending of anything. Our methodologies typically expect our students to set aside their expertise and interests, even the way they work and think, and drop down into a methodology with a particular structure of practices that's supposed to guarantee systematic, proper research and true findings. Dewey said we should begin with the child and not the curriculum. I think the same holds true of doctoral students and methodologies. My point is that a doctoral student in the social sciences who's already worked as an architect or an economist or a school teacher shouldn't have to put aside the practices they've learned in those disciplines and focus instead on interviewing and observing people, which are the two chief practices of qualitative methodology. In fact, most of our students have begun their research long before they enter graduate school. It's never clear when inquiry begins, and it doesn't make sense all of a sudden to tell people what to do when they inquire, whatever that is. As for me, I had no particular research interest when I began my doctoral studies at midlife. I'd already had 2 successful careers as a school teacher and a librarian, but I was bored with everything and had come back to the university with some vague goal of changing my life. How, I didn't know. It was all the reading that changed my life. Finding the long history of that strange thing we call human being, finding controversies about the work of language, finding philosophical concepts of immanence I didn't understand, concepts which seduced me, insisting I think. At the beginning of my scholarship was reading the words of others, skimming along sentences thought and written years and decades and centuries ago, and then stopping, shocked, lingering over a phrase, reveling in words put together differently. Some say reading is lonely, but for me, it's an intimate and intense engagement with those I never know otherwise. Those who thought I could never think and would never find otherwise. I can lose myself in reading. I become imperceptible. So begin there with that wonder, with the thought and concepts of others that upend everything. Begin lost and confused, and then just do the next thing. Experiment, invent, which takes me to my fourth practice for post-qualitative inquiry, which is to trust yourself and get to work. Because no one can really tell you what to do. It's your life, it's your work, your scholarship. I advise my students to do the next thing that makes sense to them. And if that doesn't work, then do something else. Talk with someone, go for a walk, read another book, host a dinner party, drive to the beach, write another paper. Watch the next episode of the Netflix series. I do a lot of that. Take a philosophy course on Bergson, run for mayor, fly to Stockholm to visit Italy. Take a class with Jonathan at GWU. There are indeed, as Foucault said, 1,000 things to do, to invent, to forge. Truly, I don't know how to separate inquiry from living. Thought inquiry can't be confined to a systematic research process, to some pre-existing methodological recipe that prescribes certain practices and forbids others. I could say that post-qualitative inquiry is a kind of long, slow preparation that requires we wait and make wait and not deliver on command. Inquiry that never comes to any particular conclusion and has no findings. Inquiry that never begins or ends, but may sometimes be more intense, more urgent, more demanding. This kind of inquiry can't be divided into handy categories or closed off into language. In fact, whenever the label post-qualitative inquiry appears, it should immediately shatter and fly off. After all these years, I'm quite sure that everything is always happening at once. Sorting my days into categories like research and not research makes no sense to me. Saying these practices are scientific and those are not makes no sense. Directing someone to do this and not that in a particular order makes no sense. I wish we could just loosen up. I wish we could focus on the play and the extreme looseness in the structure of things. My desire has been for post-qualitative inquiry to provide that looseness. I do agree with Deleuze and Guattari that ordinary thought is so strided and normalized that it needs to be erased, cleaned, shredded to let in a breath of fresh air. I do believe reading the thoughts of all those others who may have already thought what we need to think now is powerful magic. I do believe we have to trust ourselves, help each other think, and just do the next thing. Together, I hope we can turn down the volume of this disaster movie that runs in the background of our days now and invent a different world and a future to come. To do that, I think we have to tackle the big one. And as Foucault said, refuse what we are. And as Horkheimer and Adorno said, give up the exhausting strain of holding the eye together. We have to think big now because we're running out of time. But we've done this before, and as Foucault and Kuhn taught us, turns and shifts can happen quickly. If we help each other press on the limits of whatever we think controls us, they will stutter and shiver and just fly off. The structures will deconstruct themselves and make room for something else to be thought and done and lived. And that's the goal of post-qualitative inquiry. Difference and invention, freeing life from what imprisons it. I look forward to thinking with all of you about this work. Thank you very much.